I'm Susan Scheewe, and I'm going to be showing you today how to do the wonderful frosted window pane. It'll be fun and easy for you to do, so please join me. I'll be right back. Welcome to my studio. Today I'm going to be showing you how to do a beautiful technique. It's going to be fun and it's going to be easy. I'll show you how to get this wonderful frosted look, and we'll get right to it in just a second here. The first thing I've done, I've got my watercolors out, and I'm going to come in and I want to take those and spritz them just a little bit with water. So I get those wet. And I'm going to come in, and I've already put tape on there. And this is watercolor tape that I've put on here. And the reason for that is it's not as sticky as your normal tape is, and so I can get it to lift off, but it still would be heat sensitive. So when I put that on, some of the things to think about: I don't want to use a hair dryer when I'm using it. I don't want to put it on way in advance and then set it in a car and let that, I'm going to move this in just a tiny bit so you can see it more easily. I don't want to set this in the car after I put tape on it and put it in the sunshine. I don't want to put it on a table where the sunshine might come in and beat through a window and sit there, and maybe do it beforehand. So you want to keep it in and think about areas that the heat would be affect the stickiness. You know, probably everybody at home's got some tape, and you go to use it, and if it's old tape, you know how it's real hard to pull off. Well, the same thing can happen. But this is made so that it's not that sticky. Now, as I pre-wet this area, and I'm using one of my background brushes, I've got background brushes that come in a variety of sizes, so it depends on how big you want to paint this. And as you're working, I'm going to pick up some blue and some indigo. It's kind of a gray color, and I want a little bit of the turquoise in it. You can vary the colors as you're working. And as I'm coming through, I want to get a cloth here. I'm going to pull this on around. Now I've got this really wet. It's going to be important. It's going to be important that it was wet enough that it's got to be a shine. Remember, watercolors dry lighter. Watercolors dry lighter. Acrylics dry darker when you're doing them. Acrylics also dry, and when they're dried, they will not lift back out, such as a watercolor. So acrylics are fun to work with. Watercolors are fun to work with. They each have their own properties that make them unique, and you want to use those to your advantage when you're painting. Watercolor is so fun, and it's easy to do, and unfortunately many people have given it a bad rap because they had difficulty with it, and I think part of the biggest difficulty was using improper paper. And now I'm going to come in here, and this is plastic wrap. So I'm going to lay this on just like this, squishing it down. And you can do a variety of colors in there. I'm going to come on in, and I'm going to put in some more color. So I want to start out, it's wet. I've got, as I'm working, some of my watercolor tape on there. If you just joined it, there's nothing more frustrating than coming in just a minute late, thinking, oh, I was going to turn it on, and you go, ah, she's already going, and I missed an important step. So this is taped on there, heat sensitive. Coming on through. I'm pre-wetting that. That's going to make it way easier if you don't pre-wet it. You can have trouble. It's 140 pound cold press, and it's an easy, very strong paper to work with. How to get at the poundages, because I know for a long time I didn't know. They weigh 500 sheets of paper, and so 500 sheets of paper makes, would come, when you weigh this, 140 pounds. So if you're using like a 90-pound paper, the problem is it's going to be a lot lighter, and you run into a lot of things with buckling on it. So I'm just coming back and forth in here, and this is, as you can see, I've got it quite wet. And then there's Another popular paper is some that's 300 Pane, which is really stays wet because it's heavier weight, very easily for a longer period. This is just one of the easy ones to work with, so you won't have trouble. Now, I don't want to let this dry, so you've got, if you're doing it, it's important that I come back in with this plastic like now, so that as I'm putting it on, I kind of just let it crunch up. Gives me a really fun textured look. You can think of many ways you're going to be able to show it. The longer I leave this on here, the more of an outline it'll have. If I start to lift it up right away, you can see how there's not much showing. I'm going to put this back down, and I'll show you how this looks after it has sat on there for a little while. So it's important. Now, as I'm putting this bottom one on, something to remember when you're painting is don't cream over the top of whatever that little subject is. So I want to not go over the bird with the water, but I want to go around the little bird shape here. So I'm going to pull this out. We had a little bird that was in a fir tree outside my kitchen window, and I'd go out and put a lot of bread out there all winter long, and it was so fun to watch. And while our windows, being thermal, we don't get that frosted look. But I can remember when I was a little girl looking out the windows, and I loved to have the frosted window in the kitchen, and I'd write my name in it. And so fun things that you could do, even as you're working with these, is you could use maybe, later on we'll be using some blue block, which is a frisket, a blocking agent, and you could put something in, write it in the window, and then do this technique, and it would block the area and come back in and add color as we are here. Indigo is the color, a little bit of deep turquoise, and as I'm working I've got ultramarine and I've got cobalt blue. I like both the blues, so make sure you know what colors I'm using. I like that grayness because it kind of makes you think of winter. You might think about making these on greeting cards, because as you're working, I found that, especially with teaching, when you start in on those greeting cards, you're not so frightened of making a mistake. And even if you do, we all have a friend that you can send those cards to and have a good day and say, you can see that I'm still learning, or if it's a really, we all have those days where it doesn't work quite like you plan. And you can say, put in your card, well, this tells you my day has not gone well, as you can well see, but I'll send you one in tomorrow. It'll maybe go better. Now, I put this on again, and it's really important to get this on while it's wet. Think about adding it dark enough, color is what I'm trying to get out of my mouth, dark enough pigment that'll show, and I'm going to set this area over to the side, and I'm just going to leave this on. Now, I could leave this for a week if I wanted to. I mean, there's no hurry. If I can't get back to it, it's not a problem. And I already showed you if I lift it too quickly, the only problem is that it makes a more softened background. It doesn't have as much texture to it. So I'm going to shift over here, and because of time, I'm just going to lay this over to the side. I'll show you in a bit what that looks like as it has sat on there. And as we take a look on this, you'll see that this will be the same pattern. See how, as it's worked on there, how it looks so wonderfully patterned. It looks like that frosted window pane. And as I'm working here, I think I'll reach over and get a little piece of tape so that this is not going to slip for me. It's wanting to slide down just a tiny bit. Anchor this, and there, don't have to hang on to that. There. Now, I've still got tape on here. I don't know if you can see this, and it's watercolor tape, and remembering it's heat sensitive, and I'm going to come back in, and I want to do just a little sketch around it. So I'm going to use my angular watercolor brush. I use synthetic brushes. Years and years and years ago, when I was very young, all I ever used was a round brush, and that's all I knew to use. These angle synthetic brushes weren't even developed at that time. It makes it much easier to paint with these. Now, what I'm doing here, I'm coming down to the bottom of what's going to be a window seal, so I'm going to make this the window seal in a minute. And I'm going to come in here, just giving this a little bit of color so it looks like there's snow buildup here, and then there's snow with shadow, indigo, blue, even a little bit of lavender. Is really pretty in there. I just love painting. It's really fun to paint, and I know sometimes I do so many different things I don't always have as much time to spend a lot of days painting every day like I used to because we get busy, but I sure spend a lot of days, and it's so much fun when you're doing it. It's relaxing. The nice part with the watercolors, even though I like oil and acrylic as well, I can travel with them if we're going someplace. I tend to be a little bit hyperactive, so I can't just stay sleeping in if we go on vacation. And I can take my paints with me, and I can paint. I can get cards. I hate to fly. Hate it. Scared to death because we've had a couple problems when I've been up on the plane. And like we've gotten ourselves in crash position a couple times. So I'm always so nervous. And one of the things that I can do is take some, if I'm on a long flight, I can take my watercolors with me, make some cards, and I get sort of on the inside edge. And I can sit there and paint. It gets my mind off of the plane flying along. In fact, I occasionally can get so into it, I've noticed that all of a sudden the plane's bumping, and I'm still painting. So you can think of lots of things that, as you're working with painting, that will make it fun for you, and the watercolor being easy to travel with. Now, as I'm working here, I'm going to pull this back because I want to show you how it comes back off of here, and I want to be careful with it. I don't want to just rip it. So I want to pull slowly and pull it slowly as I'm pulling this back. If I rip it, I'm liable to tear the paper. If I used normal tape, and what I mean by normal, if you use just regular old masking tape's usually too sticky. So I'm going to pull this back, and I still want to be gentle. Try doing this on the paper that you've purchased, because sometimes you'll find that some papers are, even though you're using watercolor tape, more sensitive. So I'm just going to pull all this stuff back. And you'll think of a lot of other ways that you'll be able to use this watercolor tape, because it's, whoops, one little area, you want to come down here. Works just great. See how already I've got the look of that window pane. And not only that, it sort of straightens things up here. So I'm going to come down and get just a little bit more color down on the bottom. And I'm going to pull this around before I pull this off. And I think, too, another good idea, so I can get a better ledge in here before I pull this one off. I'm going to come in now. Let's look. I'm going up to my palette. I'm going to get some indigo, my two greens on my palette. This one is always stays Hunter's Green. This one is Hooker's Green Deep. Those are the two greens that I most often use. They're down in a well, so I can get them really wet. I want to use it with some indigo. And I'm going to come right up. Now see how that tape's going to work as a protection line for me, so I can go over that. And I decided I better do that step first. And I'll leave a little snow. I've got some bushes underneath here. And I'm going to come on down. I almost forgot to do that. And it just makes life easier. It's not that you couldn't put the line in, but boy, lots easier. I'm pulling this down. If I let it dry more, I get more of a wood grain in there. I've got it a little bit wet, so it makes a little softer look to it. And I'm going to come up underneath there, make life easy for myself. So think of ways that you can use this tape yourself in maybe helping you with your painting. You could use it with watercolor or acrylic. If you just tuned in, it's watercolor that we're using. And when I was very young, I was very lucky. My great aunt would come for the summers and visit, and she was a watercolor teacher and a China painting teacher. And I would love to sit and watch her paint. And as I was very young, I would sit and I can remember watching her beautiful painting, and then she started teaching me how to paint. So I started at a very good age. When children are young, let them get into their paints, and don't be critical with what they're doing. Don't keep picking at what they're doing. Give them a lot of encouragement, and remember, ask them what they feel about it. Don't go back in there and figure it has to be just absolutely perfect. In fact, probably some of your most treasured memories will be those that your children did when they were young. Now, I'm going to look down here, and we're going to start in on this bird. And as I'm doing it, I want to start with the eye area. It's very small, and it's easy to get that out of shape. One of the most common mistakes that I've seen in people who are working with painting these little birds is they put people eyes in them. And what I mean by people eyes, they put whites in them, and you don't want to do that. I'm going to leave a white highlight. That's the difference. You don't want to give them an odd shape. They've got a little round shape. I'm leaving a little unpainted area white. If I forgot to put that little unpainted area in, I could come back in and put a dot of Chinese white. So I'm not sure if you can see it, but there's a little dot of white in there. Now come right up beside it, leave a little area unpainted on both sides. Better to start a larger area and kind of sneak up on it. And although you're not, traditionally, you're not supposed to use white, opaque white when you're doing your watercolor. You know, if it works, use it. Coming back in, I know my great aunt would have just said, oh, no way are you supposed to get white in there. But, you know, things, even with the Watercolor Society and some of the different things, mixed media, you can, if you're having trouble, you can add a few dots to an area if you've forgotten them. I mean, make your painting fun. Now, look here how easy that was to get in there. I'm going to next come in, and I want to be careful. I want to let some areas dry. I don't want to put the beak in right away because I've got that dark coming down to it. So yellow and the dark might kind of bleed together. So I'm going to go down under the bill. And remembering this bird is not a parrot, so I'm going to keep that bill quite small. It's easy to make some funny things when you're doing your paintings. I know now and then just keeping a sense of humor is the important part. I was painting these silly sheep one day in a different painting, and I swear when I first started painting them, they looked like cows, and then I shortened the legs, and then they looked like pigs, and then pretty soon I got them looking like they were sheep. So you want to watch these type of things where you don't get a bill out too long and just kind of be able to laugh at yourself when you're doing it. Now I put darker color in, and I'm going to come back and soften this a little bit by adding some water. And I pull this through. When in doubt, don't add a whole lot of color yet. Just come on down. Look how easy that is, and you've got that shape going already. And I've got a little tiny bill out there, and that's important that I wait a minute now, because the yellow going in there, as that's wet, would bleed together. Those are some of the things that I think cause people frustration, is they don't think about what's going to happen. Now see where I'm hitting that? I'm just pulling with water some of the color down on the back. Don't need to add a lot of color. I can, at the indigo, gorgeous color, a little bit of burnt umber. Got a nice pointed round brush. If you're starting to paint, get yourself good brushes. Don't do yourself a disservice and think, oh, well, that old brush, you know, I did some house painting with it, and it's kind of beat up. It'll do. You need something with a point, and those points are going to work for you because it's going to be your tool that makes it easy. A lot of times we end up faulting ourselves for poor equipment. So I can't stress that enough, because I know even when I first started doing painting, I was fortunate enough to have not a lot of it, but I had good equipment and taking good care of it. Watercolor, the nice part is you can use it with these same brushes I can use in acrylic. I could use the same brush in oil, but, listen to me, but if I use it in oil, it goes up in the ferrule. And so from then on, I would mark it with oil on, I would write it with a permanent marker on that brush so that I didn't get it back into my watercolor. Now look how easy that was to get that shape going in there. You can see I just pulled these back. It wasn't hard to do. I got a little bit of detail going in there, putting just a few dips and dabs on there. I didn't make it too smooth. Sometimes there's a tendency when you're first starting to get an area a little bit too smooth, and actually it doesn't look as realistic. Now if I came in underneath here immediately with some of the darker area, it would bleed together again. So I'm going to let that whole area sit for just a minute. I'm going to start in to show you a little bit of what I want to do on the window panes. As I'm lifting this, I'm going to pull up and I kind of give it a dry brush. What I mean by dry brush, it is not as fluid. I don't have it as wet, and I'm kind of letting that drag a little bit as I'm pulling this up. And so when you are saying a dry brush, it doesn't mean that it's exactly dry, but it means that you've got a lot of the water off of it. Some just very little tiny pigment. So when you're hearing the word dry brush, that is what that term means. Pull this on through, and it gives such a nice wood texture. Now, if you got it a little bit wetter, you could let that area dry and come back in with a little bit of deeper color. The green is pretty on it. Again, maybe you want to do depends, I can deepen it like this. So if I want to have a little bit deeper color, I can come back in. Practicing them on those cards, I know gives you the encouragement and a little bit more self-confidence. You're not usually so frightened of making a mistake on those. So I'm going to come on around there, putting this on, pulling it kind of around the edge, and you can see how easy that is to get that in there, pulling that around. I tape that first. If you've just joined us and you've wondered how I've gotten this frosted look, it was really easy to accomplish. So I'm going to come back in and I'll show you in just one second. Now, I think probably you've got the idea of how I'm putting that on here. So I want to go back in so we make sure we get all the areas covered. And you can see how that looks like a window pane. Let me pull this over so that as you're looking at it, now this has been done earlier. You could let it set for a couple hours. This was only sitting for, oh, maybe about 10 minutes. Up here, you can see how wonderful this already looks, and it has that frosted appearance. You'll think of lots of different ways that you can do this, and I think it'll be fun and easy for you to do. And it's just a really fun technique. Now I'm going to pull this back, not getting in a hurry and yanking it. If I yank it, I could tear the paper. So I want to pull this gently. And usually when you're pulling gently, you want to pull away. Don't do that, because like right there, you could see where I scuffed my paper. And right, just that easily it can happen. And so keep your patience as you're doing it. Now, this is dry, right? I can do two things. I can come underneath here and start to put in a shadow. I want to make sure I get that bill on that bird. So I come in and I want to get some yellow. And as I put it up here, paint the entire bill yellow to begin with. Let it sit for a minute. I'm going to go do a different area for a minute while I'm letting that sit so I can put a little more detail in it. And the area I'm going to do is come back in with these branches that are really fun. This is the best time in the world to be nervous, because as you come across, you can just wiggle that a little bit. It's going to look a lot more realistic if I wiggle these branches in and have them so that they, as I'm coming across here, a little bit of variation in color. But you can make them too straight. You know, if you made these too straight coming out of there, they wouldn't look right. They'd look stiff. So I want to get that part in. And then you want to come in. The next part is do this part fast. It's going to be easier for you to do it fast. I'm going to put these branches on, and if I pull these up using my greens, do it fast. Now, these needles, you want them to be more straight. Well, curving, not perfectly straight, but you don't want them looking like you've got a bunch of snakes on there. Look how easy those are. Just go hurry, 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 hurry. Pull those through. That's really easy to do. Fun. Think of putting lots of variations in here. Don't be afraid of getting lots of needles, pulling up over the branch, over the seals and window pane here. Come back and connect these a little bit. And of course, once it's dry, you can always come back in and add some more to it. You don't have to do it this fast. But what I'm saying is if you go real slow as you do those needles, the problem is they tend to get wiggly like that. You don't want to wiggly looking like they, usually they're fairly straight in there. Now, finishing touches. We're going to come in here, and as I'm putting on finishing touches, I want to put in just a few more shadows. So I'm going to come in underneath that bird, deepen it just a little bit more. See that contrast, how nice that looks. So when you're working, getting that contrast in there is going to be helpful. And I want to get just a bit of color on that window pane. I'm going to come back in with some of my greens, some of my indigos, pulling it across. Remember to get it just a little bit dry brush. It's going to make it look more like wood in there. It could be any color you select, but if you do it with it just a little bit dry this time, completely, it gives it that appearance of wood grain. And then you can come back in, and I hope that as you've done this, or watch me do it, I should say, that you are going to do one just like it, and I really appreciate you watching me. Thanks for joining us today.